Cyberpunk 2077 and Starfield are completely different RPGs. One's first person only, one is set in space, one has this, and the other has this. Because of these clear similarities, I thought it'd be perfect for our next video game versus. So Cyberpunk 2077 and Starfield are hitting the ring today. Let's see which game is better. Let me know your winner down below, and we're going to compare 5 critical elements of these games for each of these categories. I'll pick one winner and we'll see who wins at the end. Obviously, this is all for entertainment value. I actually really like both of these games, but let's go. Technical design is always our first category until I can come up with a better name for it, and this encompasses graphics, performance, and bugs. Now, we have to talk about Cyberpunk at launch. Now, the launch performance wasn't great, it wasn't awful, but the performance wasn't the issue, and neither was the graphics. Like, it was still actually quite a pretty game with the ray tracing that was there at launch compared to what it is today, but with that ray tracing plus just that neon feel of the world and how the light reflects from all those neon lights, and it always looked good. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was the bugs. Now, we have probably all seen some sort of compilation videos out there since Cyberpunk came out about all of the bugs and issues that the game had at launch, and there was a substantial amount of them. I was in one of those lucky camps that didn't experience any overly awful issues, but there was plenty that I did come across, and it does dampen the experience, especially at that time when we were all very overly hyped for this game, and they had essentially told us this was, going to be the next greatest thing, and it just wasn't all the way there. Now, since then, Cyberpunk has made some incredible achievements in terms of the amount of patches that it's been through, plus update 2.0 that recently came out. But even on the technical stand front, we now have NVIDIA frame gen plus DLS 3.5 in the game, and it's literally the pinnacle of graphical fidelity these days. You think about how Crysis was that for a long time. Cyberpunk has really taken that cake, and anytime you get a new graphics card on PC, the first game you're going to boot up is Cyberpunk to just see how it looks, because it's definitely one of those games now. Starfield, on the other hand, the performance has been really good. I don't think it's been great, but even despite the fact that it is only AMD FSR and all of that stuff, it hasn't been awful. And they have done quite an incredible job of having each location feel very different. The game has a very wide color palette, whereas Cyberpunk does have a diverse color palette from, being sort of the desert landscapes in the Nomad area to the neon and the lights in the city. But Starfield really takes that to a different level because of the different planets that it has and the way that they can really play with different environments and using different assets to make things look different. And the vistas in Starfield is just something you don't get a whole lot of in Cyberpunk, is when you land on planets or even you're in the city and you can sort of look out and you see those vistas with the moons or a planet in the background. They look absolutely incredible. Now, literally today, they released the DLS patch into beta, and I've actually been playing it a little bit, and it's actually surprisingly good. I can get over 100 frames now with and without frame gen as long as DLS is enabled. You get rid of that awful ghosting effect from FSR, so really credit Bethesda for actually finally putting this in, and it does seem to be really good. I am not a technical whiz, so I wouldn't be able to tell you all the nuts and bolts of this, but my dumb brain tells you it does look good and it works really well. Bug wise, Starfield is actually really, really good. Now, there is still some issues, and I had some of them during my review period as well, and for the most part though, none of them were game breaking, none of them really hampered my experience. They were all just minor niggling things. And the thing to think about for Starfield as well is just the amount of systems that are in this game, right? You've got the outpost systems, you've got research, you've got the ship building, you've got the ship combat, you've got the low grav stuff, the high grav stuff, the no gravity stuff. There is so much behind the scenes technical stuff in this game, and all of it, I was going to say just works, but I'm not Todd Howard, I can't say that. So it works, right? It works pretty good. And it's definitely a technical achievement because of that as well. So I think for this category, Starfield is the winner. World design is next, and Cyberpunk's Night City is quite diverse. Each suburb feels unique and different from the previous one. All the streets are named with street signs and the people walking around, and especially when you get outside the city, it really gives you that sort of contrasting aspect of being in the hustle and bustle of the city to the quiet, empty, desolate sort of desert that's surrounding Night City. Driving around the city just gives you such good vibes as well. You put the radio on, it's very atmospheric and sort of enjoyable to scoot around in the city. However, CDPR have made numerous changes to the world and the feeling of the world and the immersion of the world basically since launch with every patch, culminating in update 2.0. So that dynamic feeling of the city and that emergent gameplay has really changed since launch. Like at launch, basically every NPC was just like a copy and pasted. You would see the same NPC everywhere. They barely had any pathing or AI. Same with the police. There was plenty of compilations out there of, the police just literally spawning in front of you. And that really does impact that world design and that feeling of immersion and that dynamicness of the world, right? You think about a great game like a GTA or a Red Dead Redemption, just to bring two other games into this, how their worlds and just the dynamic feeling and immersion in those worlds are really incredible, and it adds to that city vibe and that sort of feeling. Whereas Cyberpunk at launch was definitely trying to emulate a lot of that feeling of GTA, but it just wasn't all the way there. And we can see now with update 2.0 that it is definitely much closer to that, right? The police actually work properly now. The NPCs have better pathing and AI, and cars get out of the way. They don't just drive into you, though some of them do. But there's a lot more happening there, and the city feels a lot more alive and actually like a city than at launch, where it just kind of felt like a backdrop that you were using to sort of move between A to B. It never felt like its own thing, and now it actually does, as you can interact with it in that way. And they've also added apartments finally as well in one of the updates, so you can actually buy apartments now, which is fantastic because I love that sort of stuff. I would like a little bit more customization in the apartments though. Starfield, on the other hand, is a completely different take on what like open world and world design is, in that you've got just large, diverse landscapes literally everywhere with all these 1,000 planets, and inside those there are these major cities, like the business like general sort of hustle and bustle of New Atlantis, to the western feel of Aquila, to that cyberpunk feel in Neon. Starfield's world is filled with diversity, and because of being set on all these different planets, you can field that while it's still feeling like the same game. And I really like that aspect of Starfield, that they've taken those liberties to have these environments and locations feel completely different. And you may connect with certain ones than the others. For me, I really connected with the western feel of Aquila and the people there and the stories, whereas my partner really connected with the cyberpunk feel of Neon. Maybe she should go back and play Cyberpunk. But the photorealism tech that BGS also used for these planets to get that look and feel when you land on those planets, and you can see that really long vista, especially when the light streams in from like a moon or the sun and that sort of a thing. It does just like flat out look beautiful regardless of what settings you've got the game on. And it's honestly hard to think about the exploration and really if anyone would be interested in doing it if the game and these planets didn't look as good as they do, and the diversity and the color palettes on them as well. There is always that little bit of enjoyment and excitement when you land on new planets, even if some of them really don't have much on them to do, right? Like that's definitely a criticism of Starfield, but you can't deny that these planets and the diversity of them is actually well worth investing into and looking at. Now, the random encounters in Starfield are actually pretty good, but the downside is that most of them actually occur in space, right, as you're traveling between these locations, which also leads to the fact that a lot of them can be skippable if you're just fast traveling between planets and actual locations. So there's good and bad things about that, and I would definitely like more of that exploration on the planets themselves, as you do spend a ton of time on the planets. However, I would also like there to be more reason to actually spend time exploring in space rather than just, say, traveling to a location, seeing if any event or something pops up there, and then going, nope, there's nothing here, cool, and then moving on. And just to touch on it, you've also got outposts. So you can actually make your own changes to these planets and add your own systems, which I really like. Like if you find planets that you really enjoy and want to vibe with, you can set things up on them. Now, despite my criticisms of some of that exploration, Starfield takes this category. And I think part of that is because you can't really give, again, CDPR credit for the update 2.0, which is absolutely an incredible update, but that's a 3-year wait for that to happen, right? Starfield hasn't had 3 years to cook since it has come out. I just don't think it's fair to be like comparing a 3-year update to Cyberpunk to Starfield that literally just came out. Like, the DLCs and things that's going to come for Starfield will definitely change things. So I think Starfield takes this category at this current time compared to Cyberpunk at launch. Story. Let's start with Starfield for story. Now, on Starfield, you're just a general miner from Argus. You lick an artifact and you start to see some visions, and which that propels you into finding what these artifacts are, what else is out there, if anything, and everything else that you can do in the game, obviously with the factions, etc. Interesting to point out with Starfield is that the dialogue presentation here is always centered on that character, right? You have this really nice depth of field effect when you're talking to people, and they obviously have really incredible voice acting throughout, and such a diverse range of voice actors too. Like, I can't remember a time when I've run into someone that has the same voice as someone else. And, you know, none of this stuff is like new to BGS games, right? Fallout 4 being the exception. But this is, in my opinion, the best main story that Bethesda game studios have ever done. Now, in most of BGS's games, the main story is kind of just like a catalyst to push you through the world. And then the real story and engagement comes from the factions and the side content around it. But in Starfield, I actually think the main story here is really, really well written. And it's also the mystery surrounding these artifacts and, you know, what happens with them and what they actually mean. I really enjoy it. And that it's a very serious story. And there's also decisions and choices to make here. Really vibed with the main story and the faction stories. And again, talking about diversity with Starfield, the factions, the 4 of them are all so different, all their different stories, right? You've got some political intrigue with the UC, you've got that sort of Western theme in Freestar Rangers, you've got the espionage spy stuff with Ryujin, and then you've just got straight out evil pirate stuff with Crimson Fleet. I like how they're different and they feel really unique, and it's the most diverse, I would say, in terms of the faction storylines that BGS have ever done, and the strongest main story that they've ever done with that mystery. The downside to this is that there is definitely some weird pacing issues in Starfield, right? Because you can sort of go off and do your own thing for, I don't know, 50 hours before you even try and do the main story or do something else. And I think that some of that leads to some issues because of that freedom, but that's neither here nor there, right? Like, you make that choice to go out and do whatever you want to do in the world, which is a strength for Bethesda games and for Starfield itself, but it does lead to those pacing issues where if you're stuck in like a really critical moment in a main story or faction story or what have you, that if you just ignore it for the next 20 hours, it feels a little odd to then immediately go back and someone's just been like standing out the front of a location being like, oh, I've been waiting for you, you know, what took you so long? It's like, oh, sorry, you know, I got distracted for 50 hours doing something else, right? And they've been waiting for this really critical thing to happen. For Cyberpunk, as an up-and-comer, regardless of your life path, you're thrust into a world as a merc until you take up a contract that's just too big for you to handle and you end up stuck with a construct of Keanu Reeves in your brain and a ticking time bomb to deal with. The major difference with Cyberpunk compared to Starfield that I immediately noticed as I was playing Cyberpunk for the review period, went through all of that, was doing guides, videos, etc., and then I immediately shifted to Cyberpunk for Phantom Liberty, is that the presentation in these like cutscenes and the way you talk to NPCs and that first person aspect is leaps and bounds and completely unparalleled, not only in Starfield, but I honestly think in any game that we have played since. Because the forced first-person perspective and the way that CDPR present these conversations, you have these scenes playing out not in front of you, but around you, right? There's just a level of immersion that just isn't experienced in other games. As you sit there and characters move and interact around you, they do things, like sometimes things will happen to your left and your right. You can either see them or you can honestly just miss them because you weren't actually looking at that time. And then you get that sort of impact of, oh shit, like something happened over there. And then you can get up and move around these scenes, right? Sometimes that will actually happen. Like the characters that you're talking to will just get up and move, and you've got to follow them if you want to follow that cutscene. There's a level of immersion in these scenes that just isn't experienced in any other games. And on top of that, you've got these incredible set pieces, like even the intro to Phantom Liberty and that like the ship coming down and trying to like race after it. Absolutely incredible. And playing Cyberpunk again, even the main story as I was doing for Phantom Liberty before I jumped into the DLC was, you know, just I was surprised at how many moments I forgot, and just in terms of their quality and just like these set pieces are just incredible. But pacing issues are even worse in Cyberpunk. This is a common issue across every single role-playing game in existence, but Cyberpunk, I think, is one of the core examples that you would use to talk about this, because after Act 1, you have this literal time bomb in your brain that is killing you, and throughout the game, you will have these moments where V experiences the malfunctions of the chip that is in their head, where you basically fall on the ground, you're coughing, you're wheezing, you're essentially like having just like heart attacks every 5 minutes, right? But despite all of that, you can just like go off and do, you know, a million side gigs and whatever. All of the other like side NPCs call you and like, oh, hey, can you help me with some street racing? And it's like, lady, I'm literally dying. Like my head is going to explode. I can't jump in a car and do some street racing with you.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
But, you know, that side content in Cyberpunk is really good. but there never feels like a moment where you should actually be doing that side content, because you are always dying after Act 1. Like that never changes, even with the DLC, even though that there are moments in Phantom Liberty where it sends you out into the Phantom Liberty world while you're waiting for a call from Reed to do something. You get those moments, that pacing moments, which is definitely better handled, but it's always in the back of your mind because you have those malfunctions, right? You can't avoid them, they just happen. And it's just creates that weird disconnect between the main story and the side content, and never really allowing you to experience it at your own pace without feeling like you should be doing something else. This is a really tough category, right? Starfield's main story is better than Cyberpunk's in my opinion because of that mystery and the quality of that surrounding it. Can't talk about it without spoiling it, but the side content here I think is pretty even across the board, though I think Cyberpunk has a bit more direction in its side content and not overdoing it or focusing too much on those radial quests. I think it wins because of that immersive aspect and those big set pieces that we talked about, and the quality of the writing and the characters. Like, there's some fantastic moments in Cyberpunk that I just don't think Starfield hits that peak with those character moments compared to Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk hits those moments and they're absolutely like the peak of them as so much higher than the peak of anything that is in Starfield, if that makes sense. So I think Cyberpunk takes this category. Combat is next. Now, in Cyberpunk, the combat was completely overhauled with update 2.0 in that they completely changed all of the back-end skills and everything, which makes combat feel a little different. But across the board, even despite that, combat in Cyberpunk was always fast and energetic, and weapons had good recoil and weight to them, and there was always so many different interesting ways to tackle these combat scenarios. Something that I really credit Cyberpunk for doing is having these gigs that you can arrive at. They're essentially set pieces that you can tackle in any way you want, right? You can stealth with quick hacks and, take it out in that way, or you can go in guns blazing, or you can use melee, and the cyberware really enables that diversity in the combat system and allowing you to feel like you yourself are making the decision to engage with these scenarios in the way that you want to because of the amount of builds and diversity you can have there. They also did add car combat with the most recent patch as well with update 2.0, and the car combat here is pretty good. It definitely adds more dynamicness to the world, being able to engage in that as well, but it would have been good if that was in the game originally at launch, because you could have done some more interesting things with some of these quests, right? There's so many quests where you're just like sitting in a car waiting to arrive at, the next location or something like that, and adding a bit more dynamicness to those scenes and those quests would have been something that they could have engaged with in that way. But I don't really have much more to say about the combat in Cyberpunk. It's great across the board. Like, it's fantastic regardless of how you choose to engage with it. Starfield, on the other hand, is pretty similar, right? Like, I think that both of these games have really good combat systems. The weapons have good recoil and weight. There's so many different weapon types in Starfield, like just an insane amount of different weapons with unique, more sci-fi aspects as well, like the electromagnetic weapons to like the energy weapons, that sort of thing. It's definitely the best combat system that BGS has ever made, period, right? It might be lacking some of the real build diversity and diversity in terms of how you want to tackle scenarios like Cyberpunk is, but there is still a stealth system that you can engage in if you want. There is still different weapons that you can use, melee if you choose. I think what really elevates Starfield's combat system is the boost pack, giving you that extra verticality in combat, but also the gravity, right? You've got those low gravity fights where you're really tied to the ground. It feels a bit more like a cover shooter in that way. And then you've got the low gravity where you're just flying around the map, and even the no gravity environments. It adds diversity to combat just without even meaning to, because those scenarios feel different depending on the planet that you're on. So you get a little bit of that diversity in terms of how you want to tackle these environments, but it doesn't hit that same peak that I think Cyberpunk's does with just the fluidity that you can get when you're maxed out in Cyberpunk. But you do have the ship combat in Starfield, which is leaps and bounds above the car combat in Cyberpunk, but also it's probably the best ship combat that is in any of these space games that I have played. Not that I'm a space game connoisseur, but I actually really like the ship combat in Starfield, like dogfighting and being able to like zoom around, use the thrusters, like do a quick 180 and like fly after ships and stuff. Really enjoyed the ship combat in Starfield. And because of, again, that peak that you can hit with Cyberpunk, I think Cyberpunk takes this category. So recapping here before we get into our last category, we have Cyberpunk 2077 on 2 and Starfield on 2. And our last category is a personal favorite of mine that I really want to always delve into with any of these games, is progression. We will start with Starfield. Now, at the start of Starfield, you choose backgrounds, which is sort of like your starting skills, which you can just learn anyway, and traits, which are unique to your original character's setup. Now, as you level up, you are given a skill point, which you can then spend in any of the 5 skill trees to unlock a new skill or an additional rank to an existing skill. The more you invest in a skill tree, the more options will unlock for you. The skill system here is so much better than Fallout 4 and Skyrim. I actually love that it takes a long ass time to level up and gain skills and essentially become a god, as you often do in basically all of these games. But it also fits with the New Game Plus themes as well, as you can do the New Game Plus and then you continue to level up and get better skills. The real benefit here is that these skill choices are actually tangible changes, right? Like obviously the boost pack is the most simple example, that without the boost pack skill, you can't boost pack, right? Plus stealthing and like pickpocketing and theft and that sort of thing, as well as the social aspects of those skills and how they expand the dialogue. There is plenty of actual tangible benefits to investing in these skills. However, the downside here is that there still is lacking a level of diversity in your overall build and playstyle, as it still has that same BGS problem that they've experienced to a lesser extent from Skyrim, but definitely from Fallout 4, in that you're not locked out of doing anything. You can eventually get every single skill and rank on one character because there's no level cap, and because you're not actually forced to make a decision that locks you out of doing something else. And that is something that I really wish BGS would go back to, say like a Fallout 3 leveling system, or even like Oblivion, where you make these choices or attributes, what have you, that lock you out of certain things, because I just love that choice, right? I really enjoy that playstyle choice where you are stuck into, not stuck, but you make a decision, that's your build, that's your playstyle, and that plays into the role-playing aspects of that character because that's the choices that they made. Whereas in Starfield, you definitely have a bit more of that with the backgrounds that you choose and the traits that you choose, and you can feel that role-playing sort of coming through from that. But at the same time, if maybe you've been this rifle, like long range sniper for 50 levels and you just one day decide you're going to be a melee fighter, you can just kind of do that. And while yes, theoretically, having that choice is a good thing, I just prefer that style where you're locked into doing something and actually making those choices to progress in that a little bit further. Conversely, for Cyberpunk, as you level up, you get an attribute point, and there are 5 attributes that you can spend these points into, which give you passive buffs, but they also unlock more perks in their respective perk trees, which you also gain a perk point as you level up as well. Again, we have to mention that Update 2.0 changed this literally completely, like the entire skill tree and perk tree system got a complete overhaul. In the original design of this, it wasn't bad, but it was nothing like it is in 2.0, and so you do have to give it props for that. But also, I think the core thing that is different here, that is still different regardless of 1.0 or 2.0, is how you actually have to make decisions because of the attribute points that you're investing in and which attributes you choose. And it really plays off what I mentioned about Starfield, about that role-playing aspect of choosing how your character is going to develop, right? You can't max out every single attribute in Cyberpunk. Even with the extra 10 levels from Phantom Liberty, it's impossible. You cannot have every attribute on 20. And I really like that, because you are making tangible decisions around what your build is going to be and what skills you're going to invest in. Obviously, you can respec if you want to, blah, blah, blah. But I think that the fact that I want to point out here is that you are making tangible choices around the attributes that you're choosing, which then impact the perks that you have access to, and you can't max out everything, right? You have to make that choice, and that is something I love in these games, right? Having a build like that, being able to decide what your build is going to be, and then how that elevates your gameplay because you've invested in that decision, that's what I really like. Starfield has that as well, don't get me wrong, but Cyberpunk just does that, just that a little bit better. Plus, with Update 2.0, completely overhauling like the skill tree and making all of these actual perks as well just be like leaps and bounds are better than the original, where it was just like adding, percentage points to your damage or your reload speed and all that stuff. Now each of these perks actually do something. They add different gameplay aspects and change the way you play depending on how you invest in them, and I really love the way that this has been changed. Plus, you've also got the relic tree, which makes that even better with Phantom Liberty. But despite both of these systems being unique in their own way, Cyberpunk, because of the diversity in those skills, because of how deep the Update 2.0 skills really go into making each build feel completely unique and completely different, Cyberpunk wins this category. So throughout this video game versus, I've showed a lot of what's different about these two incredible open world RPGs. And while Cyberpunk takes the win today, Starfield is still an incredible achievement of a video game. What makes Cyberpunk truly great is the way that it's expanded and deepened the established lore of Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk world, whereas Bethesda have created an entire universe overflowing with stories, factions, lore, and a deep history from scratch. Plus, there's 1,000 planets. Even if 900 of them are completely empty, you've got factions, ship customization, crafting, outposts, and just so many systems baked into Starfield that you can interact with. Now, that's an incredible achievement on its own, and Bethesda have to get props for that. Cyberpunk 2077 and Starfield are both amazing games in their own right, and I'm incredibly thankful that these games exist for us both to play, especially so that some YouTube idiot can make a comparison video. But let me know your winner in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.